What would you do if the most harmless gesture in the galaxy became an act of cosmic terror? Commander Trelvik had seen many things in his 40 cycles as Chief Security Officer of the Galactic Commerce Station Nexus 7. He'd witnessed diplomatic incidents that nearly sparked wars. He'd stopped smugglers carrying contraband worth more than entire planetary economies. He'd even once talked down a Krathian berserker who'd consumed too much fermented spore paste and decided the observation deck needed to be liberated from the tyranny of transparent aluminum. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the human woman standing at Customs Checkpoint 3, casually reaching for her bag. The alarms began before her fingers even touched the zipper. Not the standard security alerts, not the typical weapons detection chimes that pinged a dozen times a day. This was different. This was the sound that made every species on the station freeze in primal recognition of danger. The kind of alarm that activated when something truly catastrophic was about to happen. Red emergency lights bathed the customs hall in pulsing crimson. Blast doors began their descent with a grinding metallic scream. The atmospheric processors kicked into overdrive, preparing to seal individual sections. And through it all, that bone-chilling wail that every sapient creature instinctively understood meant one thing: evacuate or die. The human, her identification badge read, Dr. Sarah Chen, Earth Technological Exchange Program, stopped mid-reach and looked around with an expression of such genuine confusion that Trelvik almost believed she had no idea what she'd done. Almost. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of alerts. Her hand remained frozen in the air, hovering 6 inches from her travel bag. An innocent gesture. A movement she'd probably made thousands of times before. Trelvik's 4 hands flew across his tactical interface, trying to understand what his sensors were telling him. The readings made no sense. His equipment was designed by the finest minds in the galaxy, calibrated to detect everything from antimatter containment failures to quantum instability events. Right now, those sensors were screaming that Dr. Chen's bag contained enough potential energy to crack a moon in half. Except that was impossible. His secondary eyes focused on the woman, while his primary eyes scanned the data streams. She was small by human standards. He'd reviewed enough Earth files to know this. Maybe 1.6 meters tall, with dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail. She wore simple clothing, blue leg coverings they called jeans, and a white upper garment with some kind of Earth Educational Institution logo. Nothing about her suggested she was carrying a weapon of planetary destruction. Yet the instruments didn't lie. "Please step away from the bag, Dr. Chen." Trelvik kept his voice level, professional, even as 6 armed security officers materialized from hidden positions, their weapons trained on various points around the customs area. Not on her directly, that would be a diplomatic incident, but positioned to respond if whatever was in that bag decided to make its presence known. Sarah took a step back, raising both hands in what he recognized as a human gesture of non-aggression. "Okay, I'm stepping back. Can someone please tell me what's happening? I just got here. I'm supposed to give a presentation on Earth technology to the Galactic Science Council in 2 hours." Earth technology. Of course. Trelvik felt his digestive sac tighten. He'd heard the rumors, read the reports, seen the footage. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 8 months ago, and already they were causing problems. Not through aggression or conquest. That would have been straightforward, manageable. No, humans caused problems simply by existing, by bringing their bizarre, physics-defying technology with them wherever they went. "Dr. Chen, I need you to tell me exactly what's in your bag." He moved closer, carefully, his upper hands still working the console while his lower hands rested near his sidearm. Behind him, he could hear the evacuation proceeding in the outer corridors. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, all fleeing from whatever nightmare this human had brought to his station. She blinked at him, and for a moment, Trelvik saw something in her eyes he hadn't expected. The same confusion he felt, but also a dawning realization. Recognition of a gulf between species that had nothing to do with language or culture, and everything to do with fundamental assumptions about reality itself. "It's just my presentation materials," she said slowly. "A laptop, some samples, my phone, charging cables, basic tech, nothing exotic. These are items billions of humans use every day. Billions. Daily." The words struck Trelovic like physical blows. His people had spent 2 centuries developing their current communication technology. The Varelli had taken nearly a millennium to achieve stable energy storage. And here was a human telling him that billions of her kind casually carried around devices that registered on his sensors as containment failures waiting to happen. "Your laptop," he said, his vocal harmonics tight with stress. "Describe its power source." "It's a lithium-ion battery. Standard issue, 40 watt-hours, nothing special." She glanced at the still screaming alarms, the sealed blast doors, the security teams taking positions behind portable shields. "Oh no. Oh, you can't possibly." But he could. And he did. Because Trelovic had just accessed the preliminary analysis his systems had completed, and what he was reading defied everything he understood about responsible technology. The humans had weaponized instability itself. They carried it in their pockets. They charged it while they slept. They gave it to their offspring. "Dr. Chen," he said, and his voice carried the weight of someone delivering a death sentence. "Your standard issue battery contains a chemical matrix that, by galactic safety standards, should only exist inside military-grade containment fields aboard dedicated hazardous materials transport vessels. You are carrying, in casual luggage, what we would classify as a Class 7 volatile energy device." Her face went pale. "But it's just a battery. Humans use these in everything. Cars, phones, medical devices, children's toys." "Children?" The word escaped him as a horrified whisper. And that's when the secondary alarms began, triggered by the scanning system analyzing every other item in her bag. The phone, the portable charger, something called wireless earbuds. Each one blazing on his sensors like a miniature sun, each one packed with enough unstable chemical potential to make his species' engineers weep in existential terror. Sarah Chen had come to teach the galaxy about Earth technology. What she'd actually done was reveal something far more disturbing. Humans didn't just use dangerous technology. They lived with it, trusted it, built their entire civilization on top of devices that by any reasonable standard should have rendered their planet uninhabitable. The question wasn't why the alarms were screaming. The question was how humanity had survived long enough to reach the stars at all. And as Trelovic stared at this small human woman and her innocent bag of technological horrors, he realized his station, his perfectly safe, carefully regulated station, was about to become ground zero for the most important and terrifying revelation in galactic history. The silence that followed Trelovic's realization was more terrifying than the alarms. He'd ordered them muted, not silenced entirely. His people weren't suicidal, but reduced to a low, pulsing hum that served as a constant reminder of the threat assessment that still blazed across every screen in the customs hall. Around him, his security team held their positions with the rigid discipline of soldiers who knew they were facing something beyond their training protocols. Dr. Sarah Chen stood perfectly still, her hands still raised, but Trelovic could see the shift in her posture. The confusion was fading, replaced by something else. Understanding, perhaps. Or maybe resignation. She looked at her bag, then at the armed guards, then back at Trelovic with an expression he would later struggle to describe. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to sadness, mixed with a weary kind of recognition. "How long have you been watching us?" she asked quietly. "Earth, I mean. How long have your people known about our technology before we made first contact?" It was an astute question, Trelvik found himself reassessing the human before him. 7 years. We detected your electromagnetic emissions long before you developed faster-than-light capability. Standard protocol is to observe any emerging species for potential threats before initiating contact. And yet you still invited us here. Still offered us membership in the Galactic Commerce Initiative. She lowered her hands, slowly, carefully. You knew what we were, what we carried, and you invited us anyway. Why? Trelvik's manipulator tendrils curled in what his species considered a gesture of uncomfortable honesty. Because the alternative was worse. A species that could develop and deploy such dangerous technology without destroying themselves in the process. We needed to understand you, study you, and if possible contain the threat before we accidentally killed someone. Sarah finished his sentence and there was no anger in her voice, just a tired acceptance that made Trelvik's primary hearts ache. That's what you think we are, isn't it? A catastrophe waiting to happen? Children playing with fusion torches. Before Trelvik could respond, one of his junior officers, a young Veltari named Shim, spoke up from her station. Commander, I'm reading additional anomalies. The bag. There's something else. Multiple somethings. The energy signatures don't match standard battery configurations. Trelvik felt his dermal plates flex in apprehension. Specify. High-frequency electromagnetic oscillations, compressed data packets traveling through. I don't understand this reading. It's like information is being transmitted and received simultaneously through no apparent physical medium. Shim's voice carried the edge of panic that came from encountering technology that violated understood principles. Sir, I think some of her devices are communicating with each other, right now, while sealed in the bag. Sarah's expression shifted again, this time to something approaching apologetic embarrassment. That would be my phone syncing with my laptop via Bluetooth, and probably my watch checking for Wi-Fi networks. Sorry, I forgot to put them in airplane mode. The terms meant nothing to Trelvik, but the implication was clear. Your devices are transmitting energy through solid matter, without cables, without permission. It's just short-range wireless communication. We've been using it for decades. She paused, seeing the horror spreading across the faces and facial equivalents of everyone in the customs hall. Oh, you don't have wireless data transmission, do you? We do, Trelvik said slowly, but it requires massive infrastructure, relay stations, atmospheric processors, dedicated power grids. You're telling me your personal devices simply broadcast information into the ambient environment constantly? Well, yes, how else would they communicate? How else indeed? Trelvik accessed his station's library archives, pulling up everything available on Earth communication technology. What he found made his earlier concerns about batteries seem almost quaint. Humans had covered their entire planet in a web of electromagnetic radiation. They broadcast everything from entertainment to financial transactions through the air itself, trusting in mathematical encryption that his analysts had already flagged as concerningly sophisticated. They carried devices that could access the sum total of their species' knowledge from anywhere on their world, often while simultaneously navigating, communicating, and consuming media. It was madness, beautiful, terrifying madness. Commander. Another voice, this time from his senior science advisor, Kal Ith, who'd arrived during the lockdown. The elderly Gentar moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent 3 centuries studying anomalous phenomena. Permission to approach the bag with proper containment equipment. I believe we need to conduct a detailed analysis before we proceed further. Trelvik granted permission with a wave of his upper left hand. Within moments, a containment team arrived with equipment that looked excessive for analyzing luggage, but entirely appropriate for defusing a bomb. They approached Sarah's bag as if it were a religious artifact, both sacred and dangerous. Sarah watched the process with an expression Trelvik was beginning to recognize as uniquely human. a mixture of amusement and deep concern. "You know," she said softly, "if this is your reaction to a laptop and a smartphone, I'm really glad I didn't bring the demonstration models I was planning to show the Science Council." Every sensor operator in the room turned to stare at her. Trelvik felt his respiratory system spasm. "There are more dangerous devices than what you've brought." "Not dangerous. Well, not to us." She seemed to be choosing her words carefully now, finally understanding the scale of the gulf between human and galactic perspectives. "I was supposed to showcase recent advances in Earth technology, renewable energy systems, medical devices, consumer electronics. Things we thought would interest you, help with trade negotiations and cultural exchange." Khalith, who'd been examining the preliminary scans, looked up with all four of his ocular membranes dilated in shock. "Renewable energy? You mean you're still developing your power infrastructure? This isn't your mature technology?" "No," Sarah said simply. "This is just everyday stuff. Our cutting-edge research is significantly more advanced." The weight of that statement settled over the customs hall like a physical presence. Trelvik had seen civilizations rise and fall. He'd witnessed technological marvels that bent the laws of physics into elegant new forms. But always, those advances came with safeguards, regulations, centuries of careful development and testing. The galactic community had achieved stability through caution, through the painful lessons learned from species that had pushed too hard, too fast, and paid the ultimate price. Humanity had apparently skipped that entire evolutionary phase and jumped straight to carrying apocalyptic technology in their pockets. "Open it," Trelvik said finally. "Carefully. I want to see exactly what we're dealing with." The containment team exchanged glances but complied. They erected a transparent barrier around the bag, established a localized force field, and set up every scanning device available. Then, using remote manipulators from behind protective shields, they slowly unzipped Sarah Chen's completely ordinary, utterly mundane travel bag. The first item they extracted was a thin, rectangular device with a glowing symbol on its back, a partially consumed piece of fruit, which Trelvik's database identified as an apple. The laptop computer, as Sarah had called it. Its casing was smooth, elegant even, designed with an aesthetic sensibility that spoke of a civilization that had long ago decided their tools should be beautiful as well as functional. Khalith studied the readings with the intensity of someone decoding an ancient prophecy. "This battery," he whispered, "contains approximately 144 watt-hours of stored energy in a chemical matrix that should, by our understanding of molecular stability, undergo thermal runaway within hours of assembly. Yet, according to the manufacturing date encoded in its components, this device is 3 years old." "I bought it on sale," Sarah offered helpfully. "It's a bit outdated by current standards, but it still runs everything I need." Outdated by current standards. Trelvik wondered if the humans had any conception of how those words sounded to galactic ears. The device before them represented a level of energy density that most species only achieved after centuries of development, and humans considered it obsolete. The next item emerged: the smartphone. Smaller, sleeker, somehow even more disturbing. Khalith's scanning equipment erupted in a cascade of alerts as it detected not just the battery, but dozens of other components, each one a miracle of miniaturization and integration. Communications arrays that could reach satellites in orbit. Processing systems that operated at speeds requiring quantum-level precision. Sensors that could detect everything from motion to magnetic fields to atmospheric pressure. "This single device," Khalith said, his voice trembling with something between awe and terror, "contains more sophisticated technology than our entire space station's communication system. And you're telling me billions of humans carry these?" Sarah nodded. "About 6 billion smartphones are in use on Earth right now, give or take." The number was incomprehensible. 6 billion devices, each one a technological marvel that violated galactic safety standards, carried by beings who apparently trusted them enough to hold them against their heads while speaking. Trelvik tried to imagine his own species developing such cavalier attitudes toward dangerous technology and couldn't. His people still treated power generators with religious reverence, approaching them only after proper purification rituals and safety protocols. But as the containment team continued unpacking, revealing wireless earbuds powered by batteries so small they should have been impossible, charging cables that managed power conversion without bulky external systems, a digital camera with storage capacity that exceeded some planetary archives, Trelvik began to see something else beneath the terror. Humans had built their entire civilization on controlled chaos. They'd taken technologies that should have destroyed them and made them mundane. They didn't fear their tools because they'd grown up with them, evolved alongside them, developed an intuitive understanding of risks that other species had to calculate mathematically. It wasn't that humans were reckless, it was that they'd redefined what reasonable risk looked like. Dr. Chen, Trelvik said slowly, when your people developed this technology, how many of you died in the process? Sarah met his gaze steadily, and in her eyes he saw the answer before she spoke. All of them, Commander. Every advancement, every breakthrough, every device in that bag, they're all built on the graves of people who made mistakes, who pushed boundaries, who died so the next generation could live better. That's how humanity works. We don't wait for perfect safety. We accept calculated risks and honor the fallen by making sure their sacrifices meant something. And there it was. The truth that made humanity both inspiring and terrifying in equal measure. They were a species that had chosen progress over safety, innovation over stability, and somehow, impossibly, survived long enough to reach the stars. But as Trelvik processed this revelation, as he watched his teams catalog technology that rewrote galactic assumptions about what was possible, a new alert began pulsing on his console. This one wasn't from his scanners or his security systems. This one was from the Galactic Science Council itself. They'd been monitoring the situation remotely, watching through station sensors as Earth technology was revealed. And now, they had questions. Urgent questions. The kind that came with immediate summons and could reshape interstellar policy. The alarms in customs had stopped screaming about the danger in Sarah's bag. But somewhere in the halls of galactic power, new alarms were beginning to sound. Political ones. Economic ones. Questions about what it meant that a newcomer species had already surpassed the established order in fundamental ways. And at the center of it all stood Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd simply wanted to give a presentation and had instead triggered a crisis that would force the galaxy to confront an uncomfortable truth. Humanity hadn't just joined the galactic community, they'd already changed it forever. The Council's summons arrived in Trelvik's neural interface with the cold formality of a legal document, but he could read the urgency beneath the official language. They wanted Sarah Chen brought before them immediately, not in 2 hours for her scheduled presentation. Not after proper diplomatic protocols had been observed. Now, and they wanted her to bring everything. Sarah seemed unsurprised by the development. She stood amid the scattered contents of her bag, surrounded by containment fields and scanning equipment that hummed with barely controlled anxiety, and simply nodded. I suppose they want to see this for themselves. They want to understand how you're still alive, Trelvik said, more bluntly than he'd intended. He gestured to the array of devices now carefully separated and isolated on specialized examination platforms. Dr. Chen, I've spent 4 decades ensuring the safety of this station. I've studied threat assessment matrices developed over millennia by hundreds of species, and every analysis tool I possess is telling me that what you carry should have killed you long ago. Multiple times, in multiple ways. She picked up her phone, carefully, gently, the way one might handle a beloved but fragile heirloom, and turned it over in her hands. The gesture was so casual, so utterly devoid of fear, that several of Trelvik's officers flinched. "Can I tell you something that might help you understand? When I was 7 years old, my parents gave me a toy that ran on 4 AA batteries. Alkaline cells, primitive by modern standards, but still containing enough chemical energy to cause serious harm if punctured or short-circuited. I carried that toy everywhere, slept with it, dropped it countless times. Once I even tried to open the battery compartment with a fork because I'd lost the screwdriver." She smiled at the memory. "My mother nearly had a heart attack, but the point is, I never once thought of those batteries as dangerous. They were just normal, part of life." Khalith, who'd been cataloging the molecular structure of her laptop's battery, looked up with his ocular membranes pulsing in distress. "But surely your parents explained the risks. Surely there were safeguards, educational protocols, mandatory training before children were allowed near such devices. There was a label. 'Do not dispose of in fire.' That was pretty much it." Sarah's expression softened as she saw the genuine horror her words produced. "I know how that sounds to you, but that's humanity in a nutshell. We grew up in a world where danger was everywhere, so we learned to live with it instead of eliminating it. Fire kept us warm but could burn down our homes. Water sustained us but could drown us. Even the food we ate could kill us if prepared incorrectly. We're a species that evolved by making friends with calculated risk. Trelvik's people had evolved on a stable, temperate world where the most dangerous predator was a herbivore that occasionally got territorial during mating season. The Gentar came from a planet so geologically stable that their word for earthquake existed only in theoretical scientific texts. Most galactic species had developed in environments that, while challenging, offered predictable patterns of cause and effect. Safety through understanding, survival through caution. Earth, he was beginning to realize, had been a crucible that forged an entirely different philosophy. "The council chamber is this way," he said finally, initiating the security protocols that would allow them to move through the station. "I should warn you, they're not just scientists who'll be present. The Commerce Directive wants representation. So does the Technology Regulation Bureau. And..." He hesitated, checking the updated attendance list that was growing by the second. "And it appears the Velshara Collective has sent observers." Sarah's step faltered. Even with her limited knowledge of galactic politics, that name clearly resonated. The Velshara, aren't they the ones who quarantined the Thren homeworld after that antimatter incident? "They're the ones who enforced the fundamental safety concordat," Trelvik corrected. "Every species that joins the galactic community agrees to abide by certain baseline standards regarding technology development and deployment. The Velshara ensure compliance. They have considerable authority in these matters." What he didn't say, but what hung in the air between them, was that the Velshara had the power to classify an entire species as a fundamental threat to galactic stability. They could impose sanctions, technology bans, even quarantine protocols that would effectively isolate Earth from the rest of civilized space. The fact that they'd sent observers to what was supposed to be a routine technology exchange presentation suggested they'd been watching humanity far more closely than anyone had admitted. The journey through the station became a surreal procession. Trelvik led, his security team forming a protective perimeter around Sarah and her sealed bag of technological nightmares. Behind them, Khalith and a hastily assembled team of scientists carried the devices they'd already examined, each one secured in its own containment field. Word of the situation had spread despite Trelvik's attempts at discretion. Beings from a dozen different species lined the corridors, watching with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear as the human passed. Sarah walked through it all with a dignity that Trelvik found himself admiring. She kept her head up, acknowledged the stares with small nods, and didn't try to hide or apologize for what she was. There was strength in that. A quiet confidence that came from representing a species that had survived its own worst instincts and emerged capable of reaching for the stars. The council chamber was located in the station's central hub, a massive spherical room designed to accommodate representatives from species with vastly different environmental needs. Atmospheric zones could be adjusted section by section. Gravity varied by quadrant. Seating arrangements ranged from conventional chairs to suspensor fields to what appeared to be a small aquatic tank for the drift-kind delegate. Today, every seat was filled, more than filled. Beings crowded the observation galleries, craning necks or sensor stalks or whatever appendages they used for perception to get a better view. The chamber's central platform, normally reserved for formal presentations, had been cleared and reinforced. Scanning equipment that Trelevic recognized as military-grade lined the walls, and standing at the primary adjudicator's position was High Arbiter Zendala of the Velshara Collective, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into fragments of cold, analytical blue. She was ancient, old enough to have witnessed the Thren antimatter incident firsthand, old enough to remember when the fundamental safety concordat was written in the ashes of civilizations that had pushed too far. Dr. Sarah Chen of Earth. Zendala's voice resonated through multiple frequencies simultaneously, a deliberate display of the Velshara's technological sophistication. You stand before this assembly to demonstrate your species' technological capabilities. We are eager to see what humanity considers appropriate for casual transport across interstellar space. The statement was diplomatic, but Trelevic heard the edge beneath it. This wasn't going to be a friendly exchange. This was a trial, and Earth's membership in the galactic community was the verdict being decided. Sarah set her bag on the central platform. The simple act produced a ripple of reaction through the chamber. Nervous chittering from the Krellian delegation, the sharp spike of alarm pheromones from the Veltari, even the Driftkind's water tank began bubbling with agitation. To most species present, watching someone casually handle what their sensors reported as volatile explosive devices was like witnessing someone juggle live grenades while walking a tightrope. Honored Arbiter, esteemed delegates, Sarah began. And Trelevic noticed she'd dropped the casual tone she'd used in customs. This was her professional voice, the one she probably used when lecturing to students or presenting research findings. I understand there's concern about the technology I've brought. I want to be completely transparent about what you're seeing and why humans have developed along these particular lines. She reached into the bag, several delegates gasped audibly, and extracted her laptop. Holding it up, she continued, "This is a portable computing device. It contains approximately 3 billion transistors operating at frequencies measured in gigahertz. The battery that powers it stores energy through controlled chemical reactions in a lithium-based matrix. By your standards, both the computational density and the energy storage should be impossible without catastrophic failure. But humans use approximately 1.5 billion of these devices globally. Last year, the failure rate was approximately 0.1%. And most of those failures were due to physical damage, not inherent instability." Zendala's crystalline facets shifted, a Velshara expression of, what? Interest? Skepticism? You're claiming that your species has achieved a failure rate of 1 in 1,000 for technology that our models suggest should fail 100% of the time. We're claiming that your models are based on different assumptions about acceptable risk, Sarah replied. May I demonstrate? Without waiting for explicit permission, a bold move that made Trelvic's dermal plates flex nervously, she opened the laptop. The device chimed softly as it activated, its screen glowing with a gentle luminescence. To Trelvic's eyes, It was beautiful. To the delegates around him, judging by their reactions, it might as well have been a doomsday weapon arming itself. Sarah's fingers moved across the input surface with practiced ease. This device is currently running multiple processes simultaneously. It's checking for network connections, managing power distribution, rendering graphical interfaces, executing security protocols, and maintaining system stability. All of this happens in the background, automatically, without any conscious thought on my part. The computational power required would have filled an entire building on Earth just 80 years ago. Now we carry it in devices thin enough to slip into a bag. She pulled up an image, a photograph of Earth from orbit, blue and white and achingly beautiful against the black of space. This is why humans developed the way we did. Our world taught us that survival meant adaptation, innovation, pushing boundaries even when it was dangerous. We had no choice. Our planet went through ice ages and warming periods. We faced predators, diseases, natural disasters. We either learned to control our environment through technology, or we went extinct. So we chose technology. We chose risk. And yes, people died. Many people, across thousands of years. But each failure taught us something. Each disaster made the next generation of technology safer, more reliable, more integrated into our daily lives. Khalith, who'd been monitoring the laptop's readings, spoke up from his position near the scanning equipment. The device is stable. All energy readings are within normal operational parameters. It's actually functioning exactly as she describes. No signs of imminent failure, no cascade reactions building, no thermal instability. He sounded almost disappointed, as if he'd expected the laptop to vindicate his fears by exploding. A new voice cut through the murmuring that followed Khalith's report. It came from the Krellian sector, from Ambassador Yithkal, whose species had a reputation for blunt pragmatism. This is all very fascinating, Dr. Chen, but it doesn't address the fundamental question. Your people carry devices that store enough energy to cause significant harm. What happens when, not if, but when, those devices fail? What happens when someone with malicious intent decides to weaponize this technology? You've shown us that humans can live with danger. You haven't shown us why we should allow that danger into our space. It was the question Trelvik had been dreading, the one that cut to the heart of the matter. Humanity's relationship with risky technology was their own business when it stayed on Earth. But now they wanted to join the galactic community, to travel freely, to trade and share and integrate. And that meant their choices affected everyone. Sarah's expression shifted. For the first time since Trelvik had met her, he saw something that might have been anger, though it was tempered with understanding. Ambassador Yithkal raises a valid concern, so let me address it directly. She reached back into her bag and pulled out her smartphone. This device contains approximately twice the battery capacity of my laptop, packed into a space 1/10 the size. By your standards, it's even more dangerous. And you're right, it could be weaponized. The battery could be punctured to cause a fire. The device itself could be modified to disrupt communications or deploy malicious software. In the wrong hands, even mundane human technology becomes a threat. She paused, letting the admission hang in the air. Then she touched the phone's screen, bringing up another image. This one showed a vast network of lights. A city at night, millions of individual points of illumination connected by glowing arteries of transportation routes. This is Tokyo, one of Earth's largest metropolitan areas. 37 million humans live there, and every single one of them carries devices like this. They ride public transportation together, work in crowded buildings, gather in public spaces. If our technology was as unstable as your fears suggest, Tokyo should be a smoking crater. Instead, it's one of the safest, most technologically advanced cities on our planet. She switched images again. This time it showed a hospital room, medical equipment surrounding a bed where a tiny human infant slept. This is my nephew. He was born 3 months premature. Without sophisticated battery-powered devices monitoring his vital signs, regulating his temperature, managing his oxygen levels, he would have died. Instead, he's now a healthy 5-year-old who wants to be an astronaut. Her voice carried a weight of emotion now, something raw and genuine. We trust our technology because we've built it into the foundation of everything we value. Our medicine, our communication, our ability to feed and shelter billions of people. All of it depends on devices you consider too dangerous to exist. Zendala's crystalline structure pulsed with an inner light, a sign that the Velshara was processing information at high speed. You make an emotional argument, Dr. Chen, but the fundamental safety concordat was written specifically to prevent emotions from overriding prudent caution. Species that prioritize convenience over safety inevitably face catastrophic consequences. History supports this conclusion across hundreds of civilizations. Does it? Sarah's question was quiet, but it cut through the chamber's atmosphere like a blade. Because from where I'm standing, the history I see is different. I see species that achieved stability by avoiding risk. That's admirable. That's safe. But it's also slow. How long did it take the galactic community to develop faster than light travel? 3,000 years. 4. Humanity went from first powered flight to walking on our moon in 66 years, from basic computers to artificial intelligence in under a century. We didn't do that by being cautious. We did it by accepting that progress has a price and being willing to pay it. The chamber erupted in chaos. Delegates shouting in a dozen languages, translators struggling to keep up with the overlapping arguments. Some supported Sarah's position, seeing opportunity in humanity's reckless innovation. Others demanded immediate sanctions, quarantine protocols, anything to keep these dangerous newcomers contained. But Trelovic wasn't listening to any of them. He was watching Zendala, and what he saw in the Velshara's shifting crystalline patterns made his primary hearts freeze. Because the ancient arbiter wasn't angry or frightened or outraged. She was fascinated. And that, Trelovic suddenly understood, was far more dangerous than any battery could ever be. When Zendala finally spoke again, her voice cut through the chaos with absolute authority. Dr. Chen, you've made your position clear. Humanity believes the benefits of dangerous technology outweigh the risks, but I wonder if you've considered what happens when your risks become our reality. What happens when a human device fails on a station like this one? When your acceptable failure rate translates to actual deaths among species who never agreed to shoulder those risks. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but Zendala wasn't finished. I'm invoking Concordat Protocol 7. Dr. Chen, you and your devices will remain here while we conduct a comprehensive review of human technology and its implications for galactic safety. This station is now under Velshara oversight. No one enters or leaves until we determine whether humanity's presence in our community represents an acceptable risk or an existential threat. The chamber fell silent. Protocol 7 was something Trelovic had only read about in historical archives. It had been invoked exactly twice in galactic history, both times preceding the forced isolation of species deemed too dangerous to integrate. And now, Sarah Chen, who'd simply wanted to give a presentation, had triggered the same protocol. But as Trelovic watched her face, he saw something unexpected. Not fear, not even surprise. Instead, there was a quiet determination, a sense that she'd anticipated this moment and had prepared for it. She set her phone down on the platform next to her laptop and reached one more time into her bag. "Hi, Arbiter," she said calmly. "Before you make that decision, there's one more thing you should know about human technology." Her hand emerged, holding a small device, barely larger than her palm. It was sleek, white, with a simple button on top. This is a defibrillator, a medical device humans use to restart hearts that have stopped beating. It contains a capacitor that stores enough electrical energy to deliver a shock strong enough to reset cardiac rhythms. By your standards, it's a weapon. By our standards, it saved millions of lives. She held it out toward Zendala, an offering and a challenge simultaneously. You asked what happens when our risks become your reality. I'll tell you, you get the same thing we got. The chance to choose whether the potential for harm is worth the certainty of saving lives. That's the choice humanity makes every day. And now, whether you accept us or not, it's a choice the galaxy has to make too. In that moment, Trelevik understood that everything had changed. The question was no longer whether humanity's technology was dangerous. It was whether the galaxy was ready to confront what humanity's existence forced them to admit. That perhaps, just perhaps, the price of perfect safety was stagnation, and the species willing to risk everything might be the ones who pushed civilization forward into an uncertain but extraordinary future. And from the way Zendala's crystalline structure began shifting into a pattern Trelevik had never seen before, he suspected the ancient arbiter had just reached the same conclusion. The defibrillator sat on the platform between Sarah Chen and High Arbiter Zendala, like a small white monument to everything the galaxy had been avoiding for millennia. Trelevik watched the Velshara's crystalline form shift through patterns he'd never seen in all his years of service, colors bleeding from analytical blue into something warmer, almost organic. Around them, the council chamber had fallen into a silence so profound that he could hear the ambient hum of the station's life support systems, the quiet whisper of recycled air moving through vents, the distant pulse of the reactor that kept them all alive in the void of space. Zendala moved closer to the platform, her crystalline structure catching and refracting the chamber's light into fragments that danced across the walls like living things. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its edge of cold authority, replaced by something that sounded almost like wonder. When I was young, and that was a very long time ago, Dr. Chen, I witnessed the Thren catastrophe. An entire civilization, 8 billion souls, reduced to scattered refugees because they pursued technological advancement without adequate safeguards. They developed antimatter containment systems that were efficient, powerful, revolutionary. And then, due to a single point of failure in their safety protocols, their primary production facility experienced a cascade reaction that cracked their homeworld's crust. The planet is still uninhabitable 4,000 years later. Sarah didn't flinch from the weight of that history. Instead, she picked up the defibrillator, holding it gently in both hands. I'm sorry for what happened to them, truly. But can I ask you something, High Arbiter? In the 4,000 years since that tragedy, how many Velshara have died from medical conditions that might have been treatable with more aggressive, riskier interventions? How many of any galactic species have lived smaller, quieter lives, because the technologies that might have expanded their possibilities were deemed too dangerous to develop? Trelevik saw something flicker through Zendala's crystalline structure, a pattern that in Velshara biology indicated profound internal conflict. The ancient arbiter didn't answer immediately. Instead, she gestured toward Khalith, who still stood near his scanning equipment. Science advisor, your readings on the medical device. Khalith's ocular membranes were fully dilated, a sign of intense stress in his species. High Arbiter, the capacitor in this device stores approximately 200 joules of energy. That's sufficient to cause severe injury if discharged directly into unprotected tissue. The device has safety mechanisms, sensors that detect cardiac rhythms, protocols that prevent accidental discharge, but those mechanisms are software-based. They could fail. They could be bypassed. By any reasonable standard, this is a dangerous piece of technology that should require extensive training and certification before use. And yet, Sarah interjected softly, in many human jurisdictions, these devices are placed in public spaces, shopping centers, airports, schools, with simple instructional diagrams. We've determined that the risk of someone misusing a defibrillator is far outweighed by the chance that it might save a life when seconds matter. Because in a cardiac emergency, waiting for certified medical personnel to arrive often means waiting for someone to die. She activated the device, and the chamber erupted in alarm once more. But Sarah simply turned it to face the delegates, letting them see the simple interface, the clear instructions, the step-by-step guidance built into its design. This is how humanity approaches dangerous technology. We don't make it safe by making it rare. We make it safe by making it understandable, by building in redundancies, by teaching people how to use it properly, by accepting that yes, sometimes things will go wrong, but the alternative, living in a world where we're too afraid to reach for better solutions, is worse than the risk. Trelvik found himself thinking about his own species' relationship with technology. The Veltari had communication systems that were reliable, time-tested, and limited to specific frequencies carefully regulated by their government. They had medical treatments that worked, but only for conditions that fit within established protocols. They had transportation systems that were safe, but inflexible. Everything worked exactly as designed, and anything outside those parameters was forbidden. And in 40 cycles of service, Trelvik had never once questioned whether that was the right approach. Until now. Until a human woman had unpacked a bag of everyday items and forced him to confront the possibility that his entire civilization had been choosing comfort over possibility. Ambassador Yithkal spoke again, his voice carrying less hostility than before, but no less concern. Dr. Chen, you present a compelling philosophical argument, but philosophy doesn't save lives when a battery explodes on a crowded station. Can you honestly tell this council that human technology has never failed catastrophically? That your approach has never resulted in preventable deaths? Sarah's expression showed the weight of the question. She deactivated the defibrillator and set it down carefully before responding. No, Ambassador, I can't tell you that. In fact, I can tell you the opposite is true. In 2011, a series of battery fires in human aircraft led to the temporary grounding of an entire model of passenger planes. In 2016, a popular smartphone model had to be recalled because its batteries were overheating and catching fire. Every year, people die in accidents involving technology that, in hindsight, should have been designed differently or regulated more carefully. She paused, and Trelvik saw genuine pain in her eyes. My sister was one of them. She died in a traffic accident involving a failure in her vehicle's automated braking system. The system was supposed to prevent collisions. Instead, a software error caused it to accelerate when it should have stopped. The chamber fell silent again. But this time the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of judgment, but of shared grief, of recognition that loss was universal regardless of species. I'm standing here advocating for human technology, Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. But I'm not naive about its costs. Every device in my bag represents not just innovation, but also failure, learning, adaptation. My sister's death led to regulatory changes that have saved thousands of lives since. That doesn't make her loss acceptable or justified, but it means her death wasn't meaningless. That's how humanity processes risk. We acknowledge the cost, we honor the fallen, and we use what we've learned to make tomorrow safer than today, even as we continue to push forward into uncertainty. Zendala's crystalline structure had settled into a new pattern, one that pulsed with soft amber light. You're asking us to accept a fundamentally different approach to technological development, one that prioritizes rapid advancement over guaranteed safety, one that accepts casualties as an inevitable part of progress. The Velshara's voice was contemplative now, not condemning. For species that have built our civilizations on the principle of minimizing harm above all else, this is difficult to accept. I know, Sarah said simply. And I'm not asking you to abandon your principles. What I'm asking is that you make room in the galaxy for a species that operates differently. That you recognize humanity's approach isn't wrong, just different. We've survived and thrived, not despite our relationship with risky technology, but because of it. And maybe, there are problems in this galaxy that could benefit from a species willing to try solutions that everyone else considers too dangerous. Khalith cleared his throat, a gesture he'd picked up from studying human behavior. If I may, High Arbiter, I've been reviewing the historical data on human technological development. The pattern is remarkable. Every major advancement in human civilization, agriculture, medicine, transportation, communication, involved technologies that initially had high failure rates and significant risks. But humans didn't abandon those technologies. They iterated, improved, learned. The combustion engine, which now powers billions of human vehicles relatively safely, killed thousands of people in its early decades. Medical procedures that now have 99% success rates were once considered experimental and dangerous. Even their space program, which allowed them to reach the stars, was built on the literal ashes of astronauts who died testing systems that weren't ready. He pulled up a holographic display showing a timeline of human technological development. Trelvik watched as it unfolded, a visual representation of humanity's relationship with progress. And what struck him most wasn't the failures, though there were many. It was the speed, the relentless, breathtaking speed at which humans had moved from one breakthrough to the next, each one building on the lessons of the last. The average time between major technological breakthroughs for established galactic species is approximately 200 years, Khalith continued. For humanity, it's closer to 20. They achieve in decades what takes us centuries. And yes, that comes with costs, but it also comes with benefits that we may be foolish to ignore. Zendala moved even closer to the platform, and Trelvik realized with a start that the ancient arbiter was examining the human devices with something approaching reverence. Dr. Chen, I want to show you something. It will require accessing classified Velshara records, but given the circumstances, I believe it's necessary. She gestured, and a new holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed a crystalline structure, similar to Zendala herself, but somehow different, incomplete. This was my predecessor, Zendala explained. High Arbiter Zenmore. 5,000 years ago, he developed a degenerative condition that caused his crystalline structure to fracture and decay. By Velshara standards, it was a natural death, inevitable and peaceful. We let him fade over the course of 3 years, supporting him, making him comfortable, accepting that his time had ended. The hologram shifted, showing technical specifications that meant little to Trelvik, but seemed to captivate several of the scientists present. Recently, our researchers analyzed his condition using modern knowledge. The degradation was caused by a specific molecular instability in his matrix structure. It would have been treatable, easily treatable, with targeted resonance therapy. A technology that existed at the time but was classified as too risky because it involved directly manipulating crystalline bonds at the quantum level. The weight of that revelation settled over the chamber like a physical thing. Zendala's voice, when she continued, carried centuries of accumulated regret. We chose safety over saving him. We followed protocol, adhered to the Concordat, did everything correctly according to our principles. And my predecessor died when he didn't have to. I've carried that knowledge for the past 200 years, ever since our research reached the point where we could finally understand what we'd lost. And I've asked myself repeatedly, were we right to prioritize caution, or did our fear of risk cost us something irreplaceable? Sarah approached the platform until she stood directly across from Zendala, two beings from radically different species and philosophies, separated by experiences, but united in grief. I don't think there's a right answer to that question, High Arbiter. Every choice involves trade-offs. You chose stability and lost someone you cared about. Humanity chooses progress and loses people too. The difference is that you're questioning whether your choice was worth it. That's the real breakthrough, isn't it? Not the technology itself, but the willingness to ask whether the way things have always been done is the way they should continue to be done. Zendala's crystalline structure pulsed once, twice, and then settled into a pattern Trelovik's cultural database identified as acceptance mixed with determination. The ancient arbiter raised her voice to address the entire council. I am withdrawing the invocation of Protocol 7. Dr. Chen and her technology do not represent a threat to galactic stability. Rather, they represent a mirror being held up to our own choices, our own fears, our own unwillingness to question whether we've allowed our pursuit of safety to become a cage that limits possibility. The chamber erupted again, but this time the chaos was different. Delegates were arguing, yes, but also listening to each other in ways Trelovik hadn't seen in decades of council sessions. The Krellian delegation was engaged in heated debate with their own members. The Driftkind's tank was bubbling with excited chemical signals. Even the typically stoic Gentar were showing signs of animated discussion. Zendala continued, her voice cutting through the noise with practiced authority. I propose a new framework. Rather than enforcing uniform safety standards across all species, we establish a system of voluntary risk disclosure. Human technology and technology from any species that chooses to develop along similar lines will be clearly marked and regulated in shared spaces. Those who wish to engage with higher risk, higher reward systems may do so. Those who prefer traditional approaches remain free to choose them. We create parallel paths forward, acknowledging that there is no single correct answer to the question of how much risk is acceptable in pursuit of progress. It wasn't a perfect solution. Trelovik could already see the complications, the diplomatic challenges, the logistical nightmares of implementing such a system, but it was something that had never existed in galactic society before. A formal recognition that different approaches to technology and risk could coexist. That diversity in philosophy could be a strength rather than a threat. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. High Arbiter, honored delegates, I came here today planning to show you some impressive gadgets and convince you that humanity had cool technology worth trading for. Instead, we've had a conversation about the fundamental nature of progress, about the price we're willing to pay for advancement, about what it means to be a civilization that values both safety and possibility. She picked up her phone one last time, holding it up so everyone in the chamber could see. This device, like everything humanity creates, is imperfect. It will eventually fail. It might even fail in a way that causes harm. But it's also connected me with friends across the world, helped me learn things I never could have discovered on my own, and let me be present for moments I otherwise would have missed. That trade-off, that choice to accept risk in exchange for connection, that's humanity. And I hope, despite all our differences, there's room in this galaxy for that perspective. Zendala moved to the edge of the platform, her crystalline form reflecting light in patterns of amber and gold. Dr. Chen, there has always been room. We were simply too afraid to see it. Perhaps that's the real lesson your species brings to the galactic community. Not your technology, impressive as it is, but your willingness to confront fear and choose possibility anyway. The vote that followed wasn't unanimous. Several species remained deeply uncomfortable with the new framework, and their concerns were valid and respected. But the majority agreed to implement Zendala's proposal on a trial basis. Humanity would be welcomed fully into the galactic community, their technology subject to disclosure requirements, but not prohibited. Other species would be free to adopt similar approaches if they chose, and the galaxy would, for the first time in its recorded history, Embrace the idea that there might be multiple paths to a better future. As the council session drew to a close and delegates began filing out, Trelvik approached Sarah, who was carefully packing her devices back into her bag. The containment fields had been deactivated. The security protocols had been stood down. Her laptop, her phone, her defibrillator. All of them were simply tools again, neither weapons nor threats, just the everyday items of a species learning to live with the consequences of their choices. "Dr. Chen," he said, and found himself struggling to articulate what he wanted to express. "I need to apologize. When your bag first triggered our alarms, I saw you as a threat. I saw your technology as dangerous, reckless, irresponsible. I was wrong. Not about the danger, that's real, I understand that now, but wrong about what that danger meant." Sarah smiled, and in that smile, Trelvik saw something he would remember for the rest of his life. Not triumph or vindication, but simple understanding. The look of someone who'd carried a burden alone and suddenly found others willing to help, shoulder the weight. "Commander, you weren't wrong to be concerned. Your instinct to protect people is what makes you good at your job. The difference is that now maybe you understand that protection doesn't always mean preventing harm. Sometimes it means giving people the tools and knowledge they need to make their own choices about risk." She zipped up her bag, that simple, mundane gesture that had started everything, and looked around the empty chamber one last time. "You know what's funny? I was terrified when I got here. First time off Earth, first time meeting alien species, first time being responsible for representing humanity to the galaxy. I kept thinking, what if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing? What if humanity's not ready for this?" She laughed softly. "Turns out the galaxy wasn't ready for us either. But maybe that's okay. Maybe nobody's ever really ready for change. You just have to trust that when the moment comes, you'll find a way forward together." Trelvik watched her leave the chamber, walking with quiet confidence toward whatever came next. And as he stood there in the empty space where history had just been made, he found himself thinking about his own life, his own choices. How many times had he chosen safety over possibility? How many opportunities had he let pass because the risk seemed too great? The alarms in customs had screamed about danger, but they'd been measuring the wrong thing. The real danger wasn't in Sarah's bag. It was in becoming so afraid of failure that you stopped reaching for better futures. It was in building a civilization so focused on preventing harm that you forgot how to heal it. It was in the comfortable certainty that there was only one right way to live, one acceptable level of risk, one path forward for all species, regardless of their nature or history. Humanity had brought many things to the galactic community. Technology that defied conventional wisdom, philosophy that challenged established norms, and most importantly, a question that couldn't be unasked. What if the price of perfect safety is the loss of everything that makes life worth living? What if the greatest risk is never taking any risks at all? As Trelvik left the chamber and returned to his duties, he carried those questions with him. And across the station, in council chambers and scientific labs, in cargo bays and residential quarters, other beings were beginning to ask them too. The alarms had stopped screaming, the immediate crisis had passed, but something fundamental had shifted in the fabric of galactic civilization. Sarah Chen had unpacked her bag, and in doing so, she'd unpacked assumptions that had gone unquestioned for millennia. The galaxy would never be quite the same. Whether that was terrifying or exhilarating or both, depended on who you asked. But everyone agreed on one thing: the conversation had only just begun. And somewhere in the vastness of space, on a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star, billions of humans continued their daily lives, carrying dangerous technology in their pockets, trusting in systems that sometimes failed, choosing progress over safety, and in doing so, proving that maybe, just maybe, the most human thing of all was the audacity to hope that tomorrow could be better than today, even if the path there was uncertain and the costs were real. The universe, it turned out, had room for that kind of hope. It always had. It just needed someone brave enough, or perhaps reckless enough, to remind everyone that playing it safe wasn't the only way to survive. Sometimes you had to risk everything to discover what you were truly capable of becoming.